Where are my scissors? Has this happened to you? Where are my scissors? I'm at home, I'm at my desk, I have a little set of little tiny drawers that have office supplies in them, and in the bottom drawer, I keep my scissors. And I use my scissors and I put them away in the tiny drawer. But my scissors aren't there, and suspiciously, the tiny drawer is propped open a little bit too. Someone has taken my scissors. Oh, and I need to use them right now, and that's why I keep them in the little drawer where I can find them. So, I go on a hunt to the usual places where I find my scissors. So I look a couple different places, and my scissors aren't there. Oh, so I'm kind of escalating maybe at this point, fuming a little bit because I can't even find my scissors in the usual spots where someone takes my scissors and uses them and does not put them away. So, whatever, I make do, hours pass. The next day, I find my scissors under a pile of papers on my desk. There they were. It was me. Hi. Yeah, I'm the problem. It's me. It was me. So, these things happen in ordinary life. We have a certain perspective on a situation, and our perspective leads to our actions in a certain situation. Now, in my situation, if I had gone to somebody and said, "You took my scissors, what'd you do with my scissors?" Hopefully when I realized I was the culprit, I go, track that person down, and as Jeff's uncle said last night in the family Zoom, I say the hardest words in the English language: I was wrong. I was wrong. Hopefully if I'm in a situation like that, I dare to say it out loud to somebody else, I can say, I was wrong. Or if I just had kept my fuming inside, I can think about it and have a little marker in my head. Ooh, I let my emotions, I let my perceptions get the better of me in this situation. So, wrongful perceptions that can lead to wrongful behaviors are an ordinary part of most days of our lives, most human experiences, and sometimes those wrongful perspectives that lead to wrongful actions and behaviors can escalate and lead to hate and lead to harm and lead to dysfunction. Just a state of mind where we are closed off, we are not teachable, and we even convince other people of our misperceptions, our self-deception. It can be kind of a way of life. It's a terrible, hard thing. And so welcome to David's life every single day. David, he had a hard row to hoe. Every single day, David was dogged by King Saul. And why? It was so utterly irrational. David was but a shepherd boy from Bethlehem who got summoned to the court to play the lyre for King Saul. David was there to help. Then it turned out David was a very good warrior. David took down the giant Goliath, the big Philistine. And Saul was so impressed that Saul set David at the head of some of the armies and troops. And David was very successful at fighting the Philistines on behalf of King Saul. So why would King Saul perceive David as a threat, a problem, someone that he undermined, someone that he dissed, someone that he actually tried to kill with that very spear over there? why was Saul like that? Well, when we were exploring this a couple of weeks ago, we noted, a couple of things. And maybe the best place to start is what Dorothy Jury said in Friday Bible study when we were mulling over what is up with King Saul, that he has this misconception. He's so misguided, and it leads him to bad behaviors and harmfulness and hate. What's up with that? Well, Dorothy Jury observed, well, remember, King Saul wasn't doing too hot, and that's why David was summoned to come and play the lyre. Come and play the lyre. So the lyre soothed King Saul. So King Saul had some sort of maybe mental health problem. He had some sort of disorder that made him diseased. And the lyre calmed him down and got him in a better frame of mind. We wondered if, is this an example of something in modern times we see as bipolar disorder? Maybe he suffered from that. And maybe that insight kind of helped David. Maybe David had some compassion or understanding for this opponent who kept attacking him. Because attack he did after all the good things that David did. Well, we observed a couple of weeks ago, now I'll pick up that thread, that the better David did in conquering the Philistines, the more unhealthy Saul got. It seems that Saul also had a zero-sum mentality, where if somebody else was succeeding, if somebody else was getting praise, it was cutting in to Saul's well-being. Utterly a misconception. There's enough praise for everybody. But in Saul's disturbed mind, this was a threat, and Saul may have suffered from insecurity or jealousy. It was just a really terrible thing that led Saul down a dark path. But interestingly, it didn't pull David down into that same dark path. Now think about it. If you were being attacked, if someone hated you for no reason, if you were being undermined, if you were being falsely accused of being a problem when you absolutely weren't, and in fact you were being a helper, how would you feel toward your accuser? I just think I'd be so upset, so confused, so befuddled. Ugh. But David somehow stays calm. He seems to be able to still function and have ideas about how to interact with Saul. So we see that today in chapter 26. There's David and his pal Abishai. The two of them have a chance to steal into King Saul's camp. And they're encamped on the hunt for David. They're seeking David. David is taking refuge out in the rocks and refuge of the wilderness. They are there, to fight the Philistines, but also to hunt down David, this big threat. Well, anyway, nighttime comes, and even fierce Abner, Saul's general, falls asleep. And David and his group are able to sneak into the camp. And Abishai has a completely legitimate idea. Saul, it looks like God has given your enemy into your hand. Here's the sword right here. I could take him in one blow. Justice. And it is sort of justified. We heard in previous chapters that David had been anointed king, even if he wasn't king just yet. David's life was threatened, so he had every right. Not threatened, he even acted on trying to kill David, so David was within his bounds to protect himself against this enemy. David had a lot of backing of the people. I think they were ready for David to be the king. So Abishai painted a scenario where David could execute justice. It would have been reasonable. But David says, no, not going there. Wow. How was David able to not go tit for tat? It was a reasonable scenario. David uses moral excellence. The whole thing we've been talking about in our study of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Moral excellence. He's calm, and then he has something we rarely talk about. We could talk about it a whole bunch more. He has integrity. He has integrity. He says, this just isn't the right thing to do. It's not our job to do this, to kill Saul. David has boundaries. He has principles. And he says this isn't our job. This is between the Lord and Saul. So he doesn't escalate. He doesn't retaliate. He doesn't do what Abishai said was kind of a reasonable response. David operates at a higher level and doesn't attack Saul. It seems that David has faith in a justice that is bigger than the grievance. David has faith in a justice that is greater than the grievance that he is a part of. Well, studying this text today, I was aware through the news and stuff that tomorrow is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. So April 28th, 1963, there was a march on Washington. And what was the context for that march? Well, part of the context for that march was 1776, the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, it said that all men, all people are created equal, and all people have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. All people have that right. Asterisks, except if you were black. That's part of the context of that march. 1776, the Declaration of Independence. 1787, the Constitution. Part of the context. Part of the other context of the March on Washington 1963 was 1863. Exactly 100 years prior to the march was the Emancipation Proclamation, which tried to renew the Declaration of Independence and claim the Constitution and say all men are created equal and have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the Emancipation Proclamation tried to correct or fill in the gaps of what our 1776 and 1787, what we said our country was all about. But what happened after 1863? Jim Crow laws, segregation. I mean, it's so shocking to think about that here in the United States, in the 1960s, people who were black and people who were white could not, in some places, use the same water fountain. They had to have different water fountains based on skin color. I mean, isn't that just unbelievable? And couldn't go to the same restaurants or sit at the same lunch counters or sit in the same chairs or seats in a bus. It's just really unjust. Very unjust. And not unjust in just a little way, but hundreds of years in the making. How do you live with such a misconception that people aren't equal, and yet you say they're equal, and that leads to behaviors and laws that create further inequality and say that people aren't equal? How do you live in such a system? How do you respond to that? Well, a particular pastor spoke into that. And he spoke at the National Mall that day, and that was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And it was on that day that he gave his very famous speech called, do you know what it got called? I Have a Dream. He spoke his I Have a Dream speech, a remarkable speech. The I Have a Dream portion is the last part of the speech, and funnily enough, it wasn't in his notes. He didn't intend to deliver that part, but that's the part of the speech that got super press coverage, and we know about it today. So that's the part of the speech where he says very bold things, very bold vision, that one day that those who had been enslaved, those who had been descendants of those enslaved in Georgia, would sit at the same table as those descendants of those who had been enslavers. They would all sit at one table together. Wow, wonderful speech. I'll put a link in the newsletter. Read it through yourself. It's like 3 typed pages. I reread it this week, and prior to the famous I Have a Dream material, so profound, is the scaffolding for that dream. You know, we can have dreams of peace, everybody gets along, but dang it, how do you get there when you're under attack daily? You can have compassion and understanding and not retaliate, but when someone is directly dogging you, undermining you, hating you, how do you behave? Well, it's interesting. Dr. King, and I love nonviolent resistance. I've been studying it for decades and try to get examples, whether it's Gandhi or South Africa or Japan. King was also a big studier of that. And in the March on Washington speech, he said, in our struggle, we must demonstrate discipline and dignity. We are on a higher plane in how we respond to injustice. He had a sense of a justice that was bigger than him, a justice that was bigger than the situation, that helped carve a path forward. You know, all of us, if we don't live in a bubble, have experienced injustice. All of us, if we've lived a forthright life, have had times where people haven't liked us, and it's not right, and it's strange, and people are irrational, and it's a hard life. The Bible is so full of examples of living with injustice. I was shocked this week when I thought about it. 1st and 2nd Samuel, chapters and chapters and chapters about how David lived with the injustice of Saul. You know, look at Jesus. The injustice that he was called a heretic and that he was called an enemy and was killed on the cross. The Psalms themselves are full of stories about God, help me, help me, help me. My oppressor is taking me down. Help me, help me. How will I have integrity? And it's interesting. This week I was like, why was David able to stand up to Saul and be so calm about it? Did David have ice in his veins? And then I read Psalm 35, I'm a regular psalm reader, and it's attributed to David. So a lot of the psalms are attributed to David. And that very psalm was like, God, help me. My enemy is unjustly accusing me. What have I done? So lots of the Bible are dealing with unjust situations with dignity and with discipline. So I'd observe some principles looking at these situations. One is getting ahead of our emotions. Our emotions are super important, and the Psalms are loaded with emotions. If we can process our emotions with God's light and grace and get to calm, that's a tall order, but it's kind of step one. Getting to calm, it takes a while. God can help us so that then we can get to step two, remembering our principles, remembering our covenant, remembering our goals, and to act ethically, moral excellence. Then there's a third step that I noticed that David did. The story didn't end with David going into the camp and not killing King Saul. The story ends with a little bit of creative genius. And Martin Luther King talks about being creative in suffering. David was creative. He found a way to do something to correct his opponent's misguided perception. In taking the sword and the water jar, David was able to demonstrate to Saul's crazy brain that David wasn't the problem. David was loyal. And in this case, David lucked out. The creative thing that David did, the nonviolent resistant move that David did, shook some sense out of King Saul. And King Saul said those hard words, "I've been a fool. I am sorry. I won't do that again, David. God bless you." Whew. It's actually possible for us mortals to correct one another and get to that higher plane of truth, that we all can get to that big welcome table together. It's possible, but it's so darn hard. That's why I'm glad we have church. I'm so glad we have the Bible full of these stories. I'm so glad for the theology of the Presbyterian Church that says we are to serve God with energy, imagination, intelligence, and love. That's kind of one of our mottos, that we operate with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. And I hope our church is a part of that lively tradition. We're a support group in the struggle. To God be the glory. Amen.